much longer than the Nazis were in power. In fact, it's almost the first word of his book, because the first chapter is called Anti-Semitism, Colonialism, and Zionism. Victor's analysis of the relationship between these three factors is very subtle and complex, and I don't want to attempt to encapsulate it and reduce it, but roughly I would say that Victor presents Zionism as mediating between anti-Semitism on the one hand and colonialism on the other. In any event, I'd like to just read the opening paragraph of the opening chapter of the book. It's short, but it will, I hope, give everybody a sense of how you get drawn into this book from the word go, give a sense of Victor's approach and also of his style. So if you'll bear with me. If there were three words which could explain the success which lay behind the creation of Israel and the conquest of Palestine in 1948, they would be anti-Semitism, colonialism, and Zionism. Not only do these words end with the same suffix, but they all contributed directly to the decision by Britain to support Jewish colonization in Palestine. Now this I take as an example of his rather wry humour, that he should draw attention to the structure of these words just before going on to make the substantive analytical point. Yes, they all end with the same suffix. I'm glad you managed to get that in early. Law, he says, being the end product of politics, which itself is a thought-provoking remark. I mean, I feel that as a philosopher, I could almost lift that phrase from that sentence and set it as an essay. Law is the end product of politics. Discuss. Law being the end product of politics was, and law being the end product of politics, was there every step of the way, providing legitimacy and a legal framework through which Jewish immigration into Britain would be controlled and restricted in 1905, as Victor mentioned in his introductory remarks, before being redirected into Palestine after the Balfour Declaration of 1917 and regulated thereafter through the implementation of a League of Nations mandate from September 1923 until May 1948. It therefore becomes necessary to take a closer look at the history behind these three interrelated phenomena, as well as the colonization of Palestine that had already begun in the 19th century, before analyzing the big international legal issues with which the rest of this book is devoted. So this is a book about international law, but law being the end product of politics, the author presents us with a political framework so that we can understand law, so that we can see law as the product of human drama, which is what I take, Victor, you to mean by politics, and especially, if I follow your drift, the drama of what was sometimes called the great game, the game between the superpowers, or the great powers of the time, Britain, France, Russia, Germany, within which, in different ways, Palestinians, Arabs, Jews, and others got caught up, with different circumstances, different agendas, certainly playing an active part, but also to some extent moved around on the board of international diplomacy. And so, that is how I see Victor's book as an example, a model, of what it means to seek to face and tell the truth about things. It's a monumental act of scholarship, but scholarship in the interest of understanding. So not only is it erudite, but it's also judicious, as befits a book about law. And consequently, I wrote to you, Victor, after I had sent you my few comments on your manuscript, that I warmed to the fair-mindedness and the humanity that illuminates your writing. These, I think, are rare qualities in scholarship of this kind. I'm nearly finished. I'm not quite. I have a little. I take the time. Thank you.
We like you.
Thank you very much. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a Palestinian rabbi named Simon ben Gamliel said, and I'm quoting now from the Talmud, "The world endures by three things: truth, justice, and peace." And Rav Buna, in a comment on Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's remarks, said these three are one. Why are they one? Well, I think what he means is this: that without truth, there is no justice, and without justice, there is no peace. This was also Nelson Mandela's insight in founding the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Victor's book, which sets out to tell the truth about the origins of the Palestine-Israeli conflict, thus helps to lay a foundation for resolving it. And therefore, I wish to commend it to you without qualification, but I would warn you again that once you start reading, you will find that you are so absorbed that you are liable, like me, to lose track of the time and fail to attend to whatever else it is you should be doing. But thank you.
Victor, can you give with us 3 topics in concise format?
Yes, I can.
Darling.
First question was if I heard it correctly, was if there was a difference between a mandate and a colony, and one of them had a sacred trust.
And the legality of Israel as a state.
Yeah, that's coming as well. Well, colony is like a general word to describe any form, I'd say, of external control. So you have trusteeships, dependencies, protected states, protectorates. The British came up with a whole bunch of terminologies to describe what we collectively refer to as a colony. You're right to mention the mandate, because the mandate was, and I mentioned this quite extensively in the book, was a special kind of legal instrument that was devised at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 under Article 22 of the League of Nations Covenant. And it spoke of a sacred trust that the mandatory, whoever that was, so in Palestine and Transjordan and Iraq it was Britain, and in Lebanon and Syria it was France, had a responsibility for the well-being of the peoples of that territory. And I use this this kind of argumentation about legal trust, and I also do criticise the British in the period Manuel mentioned, as well as afterwards, particularly in the 1948 war, argue that Britain didn't adhere to the sacred trust, didn't adhere to its own policies or the mandate structure. As regards whether the United Nations has a legal power to create a state, I would say, but in that period, I'd say you were correct. I don't know. Today, there's a controversy over that to do with Kosovo and a whole bunch of other things. But the UN partition plan was only a recommendation, never set up to create a state. Israel's existence was as a result of a conquest, which is a legal term. You conquer territory and you keep it, then it's yours. But when Israel was created, it was in a period where the law was changing, and a lot of scholars don't think that conquest was lawful after 1945 when the UN Charter was passed. As for Israel's legal basis today is based on effective control and recognition. Now, nearly all countries recognize Israel, even the PLO has recognized Israel. So I think it's difficult to say that Israel is not a state. The only issue is Israel's eastern boundary. When the Palestinians recognized Israel in 1993, they almost threw all their cards away. The only issue that's still open is that boundary question, which I'm not sure if they're looking at it, but
thanks for
yeah, of course, to use the book to encourage greater use of language. The only way, one way is education, getting used in university courses, getting people to debate it openly, and having a discussion about these issues. It's the only real way I can see how it can be used at the moment. As for the Islamic era and going back to what you referred to as prehistory, this book purely focuses on the colonial period, purely because I don't think the conflict started 2,000 years ago. It started when Britain entered the scene, and it was the colonial powers at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. I just focused on that period.
Thank you, Victor.